بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم. I was wondering, Sheikh, what is actually meant by implementing the ilm that one has? What is the meaning behind this in our religion?
Um, when we talk about implementation of the knowledge in this religion, what we mean is as Imam Bukhari has in his Sahih, he has the section on ilm coming before amal. And by amal, we mean tatbiq. Tatbiq of the knowledge means that you, first of all, understand that which you're being commanded to do. So you have to understand what you're being commanded. What is being said to me? What am I being told? The second thing is you need to know all the conditions for the thing that you want to carry out. So this thing that I want to do, what do I need to do in order for the said action to be valid? Okay, now that I know for the said actions to be valid, now that I know that, okay, is this action now that I know the action, the conditions for it to be valid, now that I do this, can I do this in a group? Can I do this individually? And what is the ruling on this matter? Is it a group obligation? Is it an individual obligation? This is important because there are sometimes slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that find out some piece of information. And then this information, they see that it's in the command form. You should do this. They assume when they see it in the command form that every Muslim's obligated to this. And so then they go out and they try to recruit or insist that every Muslim does this. And then when every Muslim doesn't, or when they say, I don't want to do this, they take that as that most Muslims are astray or most Muslims are disobedient or they don't want to do it. A classic case in point is Khilafah.
Subhanallah.
Khilafah is not Fard Ayn. But people go out and they try and they fail miserably as well. Like laymen go out, they fail miserably trying to establish some type of khilafah. And most of the time, their understandings of khilafah are mythical. Like if you read Al-Muntazim by Ibn al-Jawzi, or you read Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, or you read Shadarat al-Dhahab by Al-Akari, that will quickly remove from your mind any romanticism about the people after the four khulafa. That quickly removes any idea of these types of things. But people assume that, well, if we had khilafah, there'd be one Eid.
Right.
Why would there be one Eid when there's more than 11 time zones?
Subhanallah.
If there's one Khalifa, there'd be food and drink for everybody. There was starvation in the Abbasid period. There were people being castrated where sometimes their testicles and their penis, or just their testicles, were being removed in the Ottoman period. These are your Ottomans.
Wow. Allah.
The Ottomans were pretty tyrannical. People forget the Abbasids poisoned Abu Hanifa. They broke Imam Malik's arms. Imam Ahmed was in jail. They murdered al-Buwaiti. They murdered al-Khuza'i. Like, we forget that many of the Abbasids were 12ers, and then some of them were Safawi or some of the Ismailis. Like, we forget these things. When the Crusades happened, what would happen is the Bani Umayyah, when the Crusaders first reached Andalus, the Abbasids knew what was happening to them, and they didn't send anyone on purpose. And when the Abbasids underwent the great catastrophe in 656, the Bani Umayyah knew that, and they didn't send anybody on purpose.
Subhanallah.
So it's just, you have to look at things. So people will read something like that, or they'll read something about history and they'll say, oh, well, we've just got to implement this. So they have almost bordering on communistic or socialist utopian ideas. And so when they say, well, if we just do this, then all the ummah situations would disappear and we'd be like this. So then they go out and try to enforce these things on the ummah, or insist that the ummah do these things. But then what happens is they fail miserably because these are not, they're not individual obligations, they're group obligations. It's not fard ayn, it's fard kifaya. So then they fail and then they become despondent, and they become jaded, and they become angry. And they say, what's wrong with the ummah? So it's important to understand what you're obligated to do. There's individual obligations and there's group obligations. If it's an individual obligation, then you have to also know within the individual obligation who's responsible and at what time.
Right.
Because that's also important. So when you come to someone, he's just converted to Islam. So he's 2 weeks into the deen. Some of the information that you're going to impart to him has to be relevant to him at the time. or someone who's been far from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He makes tawbah. He comes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. So for this person, what are they obligated for at the condition they're in at that time? And some people say, oh, well, someone's responsible for implementing all of the revealed law. No, they're responsible for accepting all of the revealed law and then implementing the parts where they have been addressed. There are some parts of the revealed law that are only addressing women.
SubhanAllah.
There are some parts of the revealed law that are only addressing people who are blind that don't know where the Qibla is. So they have to make taqleed of other people. There are some parts of the revealed law that are addressing just the mujahideen. And then there are some parts of the revealed law that are the common laws that address all of us. So it's important when you talk about the knowledge and then implementing, okay, what is the said thing? How do I do it to where it's legitimate? And then after that, the final stage is, so who is this for, what I want to implement? Like, who is this for? Who's obligated to do this? Is this a group obligation? Is it an individual obligation? And when do people start to become responsible for the action? So if you start trying to make 4-year-olds responsible for fasting all of Ramadan, right? Start trying to make them responsible for all of it. That's a blunder. And that's going to cause problems for later on down the line when it becomes obligatory for them. Or it's different if little kids, if young girls want to follow their mom sometimes and they jump up and they wear the khimar sometimes. They jump up and they wear the khimar or the niqab and gloves with the khimar. That's okay. But when they're 6 years old and you obligate that on them, right? You don't have proof for that because they've not yet come under the rulers. These are people that aren't even mumayyiz. Like some of these people, 5 years old, 4, they're not even mumayyiz. So the ahkam where they first start to be responsible for ahkam haven't even come into effect yet. So then they hit 6 years old. Okay, now they've hit 6 years old. What are they responsible for as a mumayyiz, as a 6, 7-year-old? What are they responsible for? Okay, you're teaching them truthfulness, righteousness. You're teaching them istinja and the fara'id of wudu and fara'id of salah. You get them up for the fajr, you get them up for the maghrib. These are the basic potential things that you're teaching them for how to hold the mushaf, how to sit and do. Like you're teaching them these basic things. Right? You don't start going into other things. And the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that convert to this religion have to be dealt with in the same way because they still are very much childlike. And in this circumstance, when someone comes into Islam, we assume because they're adults and they're the same height and size as us, that they have the same mental capacity when they enter Islam. This is not true because their mental capacity hasn't grown yet. So implementation of the knowledge, there's a warning here. The warning is for the person who's potentially implementing it, but then there's also a warning for the person who might potentially be trying to get other people to implement.
Right, mashallah.
Because they might be trying to get people to do more than they're obligated for at the time. And when people don't have the knowledge of a particular area at the time, they don't have the knowledge because they haven't reached that point because they're still building another knowledge, then they deny something without knowing what it is. Those people are exempt. It's the person that's doing it that is responsible.
And I think this is why also when you look in the fiqh books, this is why this is so much stressed, right? The difference between fard ayn and fard kifaya, that we can have this clear difference and that we don't overwhelm the common Muslim.
Yes, because when you do this, when you understand fiqh and the background to it, the common slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not overburdened with more than he's responsible for. When you understand this and you understand where the books, and this is why the fiqh books, depending upon the person that it's written for, they're geared or they're written or they're aimed in a certain capacity. So if you look at Imam Musa al-Qadun rahimahullah's fiqh book, it's geared in a certain capacity. There aren't proofs in just the metin by itself. The notes that I've put are the background of what he's referring to and why he's referring to it. That's why I put them. But just the metin by itself, it's geared towards the basic fundamental aspects from the Book of Waters all the way to the Book of Hajj. This is the person is geared towards. And then when you step up from kutub after that, it's the level of responsibility changes based upon the books and the depth of what you're going into. And the person that goes from one book to another also has to be prepared for the next level of responsibility. But there's sometimes what happens is people, they don't prepare other people. They start off giving people intermediate knowledge, but they don't have the basic knowledge that would prepare them for intermediate knowledge. So then they fail to implement. Well, whose fault is that? Well, at that point, when they're adults, the fault is for the person for not knowing their own level.
Sure.
And it's also the fault of the person that is teaching as well, because some of those people that are teaching, some of them, they fall into two categories. Some of them either aren't qualified to teach, and then the second is they're qualified to teach, but they have to examine the subject that they're going to be teaching and to be mindful of this, especially when you start talking about teaching people in person versus teaching people online. And you have to be very careful about this because you can't see the facial expressions of the people you're teaching. You don't know the background. You don't know where they're from. You're in Brunei and the other person is in Bangladesh. Do you really understand that person's condition in Bangladesh?
SubhanAllah, indeed.
Like, do you understand that person's condition? When he's asking that question to you, do you understand why he's asked that question, the background behind it? And it's one of the things that can happen to someone. So if you're listening, if you're someone that's, let's say, you're in Mecca and you speak to someone from San Jose, California, if you don't have background knowledge of their conditions, the fiqh al-waqi', the fiqh of their condition, they can spin a tale to where you think that Muslims are just in a darura and they've got to buy houses on mortgages. They just have to. Because they can spin things in a way, oh man, oh my God, they have to. It's wajib. They're going to be homeless if they don't, because the government's made some type of decree that thou shalt all have more. It's like, no, that's not true. That's not true. So it comes from as well the person that's teaching that has to pay attention to what is being said, the condition of the person, and to understand the background of the question. Because whether people want to believe it or not, sometimes the people that are asking questions are asking a question because they're looking to deceive in the hope that they might be given an answer that will absolve them from certain obligations or that they'll use as a background. You have to understand that as well.
SubhanAllah.
You have to pay attention to that as well, because that's also to do with implementation of knowledge. Is someone going to do something or not with this knowledge, and what are they going to do? You have to understand this. Now, those cues, those social cues are more obvious when you're teaching someone in person, because you can tell by body language, eye contact, these other things. Now, when you start talking about online, by letter, the internet, social media, now you have to be far more exacting, because these places are sometimes places of cunning, and people exercise their cunning and their deception where they either desire to debate or the desire to argue. So you get pulled into a debate that you're actually not part of. But because you gave what would seemingly be an innocent answer in most circumstances, but because you didn't check the background, now you're part of so-and-so Jama. Aha, I knew he was deviant, or I knew he was this, or I knew you've been pulled into something.
Yes, and now I've noticed this several times in social media with the brothers who have studied Arabic, or either the Sheikh from Darul Islam, he can speak English. He's dragged into a conversation with people. He has no idea. He's just like, pinned, like, oh, Sheikh, can you answer this? But he doesn't know he's actually part of a very deceptive argument.
Yes, and it's a problem, because it's a problem because they say, well, these sheikhs, their job is just to answer the questions. No, it's not. No, it's not. Your job when you answer a question, when you study books of Sifatul Mufti wal Mustafti, the books that go under the Mufti and those asking the Mufti, if the person is indeed a Mufti, your job is to also know the background of the questioner.
Somehow.
So that you know what's going on, so that you understand, wait a minute, this person is looking for, that's why Imam Malik, the famous incident where the man said, Kayf istawa, how's the istiwa? And Imam Malik gave his famous answer. And then he said, I see you as a man who's come to just cause trouble and to mix up dissension. And he had him expelled from his class. How would he know to do that? because he understood the background of the questioner, maybe the person in question, maybe this happened in person. So Imam Malik who understood this, said, okay, you're kicked out because you can't be here because I know why you're asking this question. Right. So it's the background of understanding these things. So someone can't just say, my job is to just disseminate the knowledge and Allah knows best what they'll do after it. No, you are responsible at the point of contact. No one comes and says, okay, your gas is on. And you say, yeah, but I smell gas. Well, that's not my problem. You now have gas. You now have gas at your house. And that's no longer no, you're responsible. You smell gas and if he didn't smell gas before and you, after having made it possible for him to receive gas into his property for cooking and heating, now he smells gas, you're still responsible. You're still responsible.
SubhanAllah.
And so it's the same thing with knowledge. People are responsible. Now, if you've checked to the best of your ability and you have answered the question, and then the person misappropriates your question and they go, okay, now you're not responsible because you did all the due diligence you could.
Indeed.
You checked into affairs as much as you could. Then this person went and took it and they ran away with it and they did things right. I've gone out of my way to show that that my whole point is that I have no connection except to the main body of the Muslims. I've gone out of my way to try to demonstrate that and show that. So I have no connection to Braille or Deoband or Ahli Hadith, whether the Anjuman or the other one, Ahmadiyya or the Anjuman Lahori one, or Hizb ut-Tahrir or Al-Muhajirun or Sharia for UK or all these Ikhwan al-Muslimin, Al-Jama'. I'm not connected to any of these groups. Dawat Islami, Jamaat al-Tabligh. I don't have any links to anyone. Deoband, Mamati, Hayati, Barelwi, whether it's the Tafzilis or non-Tafzilis, I'm not connected to any of them. I follow the first 3 generations and I stick to the main body of the Muslims. Whatever is not that, I step on. And that's the position that I take.
Alhamdulillah.
So that I'm not connected to anyone. So people know if they come to ask me something, I don't have an allegiance to any of these, whether it's Ahl Bid'ah or whether it's disparate groups within Ahlus-Sunnah or aberrant groups, the Ahbash or AICP, whether it's any of those things, I'll tell people, Ahl Bid'ah especially, but I'll tell people within these aberrant groups and Ahlus-Sunnah, drop that. And just follow the first 3 generations, just dump that, just burn the books and just follow this. I'll tell people that because I want people to understand that my main issue is to just be with the big body of the Muslims. And those groups, even the aberrant groups among Ahlus-Sunnah, have by and large failed miserably to do what they say that they set out to do. And they are still. And those groups, you'll find that there's hostility between them and the main body of the Muslims because they desire for the main body of the Muslims to follow them, but they won't. And then what happens is they wind up being in this issues of subtle takfir. Imam Buhuti rahimahullah says it's ijma' that the people that consider most of the ummah astray or kafir are kuffar themselves by ijma', because what is this all about when the ummah, we've been told that the ummah is guided and protected from error. That the ummah will never unite upon error, and the hand of Allah is over the Jama'. And Abu Dawood, someone says, oh, well, that's da'if. Okay, well, there's another one that's from Ibn Majah. That one's not. There's another one from Ahmad that has slightly different wording. That's not. So there's different wordings. The point is, let tastami ummati or la yajma ummati, whatever wording you want, it's going to be sahih. There's no argument. The ahadith, Abdullah Sufyan al-Qadumi rahimahullah said these wordings, they're mutawatir. So there's no argument with these things. So when you understand this, people have to grasp that as a person, when you are disseminating knowledge to people, your mission with the rank and file of the main body of the Muslims is to assist them with their question, not to recruit them. Your job isn't to recruit them.
Right. And what I was also wondering is, because you mentioned prior that the mufti, he has to follow certain principles and guidelines, but when we look at the West, often here we don't have a lot of fuqaha or muftis, so the people, they generally go to the local imam. And in a general sense, here they take the local imam as a mufti. Now, what I was wondering is, normally in Darul Islam, someone who is an imam of the masjid, who is doing the khutbah, who is helping with the people and they're serving the people with their issues, in general, he's a mufti, right, in Darul Islam. But
This is correct.
here in the West, when people call to the imam, now these imams often, they're not muftis, not even near the level of muftis often. So what would you advise the people here in this case where they're trying to follow the correct ruling, but often they're not sure whether the person here in the masjid is right or not? What could they resolve to in this case?
Um, this is difficult to say because people, when they're going to their local masjid, we have to look at the background to masjids firstly, that are built in the United States, UK, Canada, and lots of parts of Western Europe. When these masjids are built, they're not built as a waqf. They were not built as a
Hmm.
waqf. Many of the masjids were former churches that have been converted over, where they tell you, listen, you can have this as a masjid, but you can't convert it to anything else because it's been a listed site that can only be a place of worship. Okay, fine. The people that have bought this site might be businessmen or they might be people within the local community. Once they've then purchased the location of the building, then they choose from among themselves one who will be imam. And often these people they're businessmen.
Right.
And so they form a charity commission, they form
Hmm.
committees. So they don't form a majlis shura, they don't form a shura body, they don't do any of these things. They tend to form unelected charity commissions. Now in the US, they claim 501(c) status. In the UK, they'll claim charity commission status in order to be exempt from taxes and other things. By doing so, they have to form committees and other things. So the imam doesn't have the freedom that he, in regular circumstances, would have in Dar al-Islam. The imam is more like a civil servant. He leads the salah, teaches the
Hmm.
Quran, if he does that. Usually just he leads the salah, he teaches the
Right.
Quran, and that's it. Now, when you look at that condition, the common slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these nations is looking to get answers to
Hmm.
his questions. How can he go to them though,
Hmm.
knowing what he knows? Because we can look at the imams in Western Europe, US and Canada, and we can see the quality of hufaz if and when they produce them.
Hmm.
We can see the quality of the people that they make. And it doesn't indicate the knowledge that you would think
Right.
should be present. Which brings you to the question, okay, so does he trust these people? You can't give a blanket answer of yes or no.
Yeah.
I think it's more of an issue where you have to keep it on balance because we can't say there are no good imams, we
Sure.
can't say there are none. So what you have to say is, okay, we have to, the person in that situation has to talk to his local imam,
Mm.
but when and if it is possible, he also has to cross reference that with the people that are known as authorities of this ummah, the marja people,
Mm.
their representatives, other people. He
Right.
has to refer that back to cross reference
Yeah,
that back,
that would make sense.
given whatever fiqh he has or what have you. He has to cross reference that back because those people are the people that have temporal and spiritual
Mm.
authority of all the ummah's affairs.
MashaAllah.
Now, locally, he looks into matters whatever he can, but for certain things, when he knows that they are in contradiction to things that are blatant and obvious, then obviously he has to go in the other direction to a said imam that might say something. So, in the case of the grooming gangs and what was happening in the UK, imams, many imams in the UK gave statements or lectures uh, against uh, against these things, but what they did in the process of speaking against it is they didn't denounce the people themselves. They said Muslims should get married, they should do these other things, but they didn't denounce it
Mm.
themselves. They stopped short. And then the people that were in their congregations, because many of these places have people in their congregations that they didn't make hijrah against those people. They didn't tell people should make hijrah from them. They didn't do any of the things that you would expect. So people have to oppose that. People have to say, okay, listen, this is wrong. This is haram what's being done. This is wrong. This culture of secrecy, what happens in some of the Quran classes where people might be sexually abused, or they might be actually beaten, punched in the face, punched in the mouth, hit with pieces of plastic or pieces of ceiling or whatever else. This is wrong, right? But people say, well, you shouldn't talk about that because it's airing the dirty laundry. Well, you can't air dirty laundry if it's public. These are public institutions. It's not airing dirty laundry. This is public. There are generations of people that are scarred from this and don't want to read Quran or don't want to go to the masjid or whatever else. So we can say that you do go to your local imam in the affairs that you know they're incongruency with the main body of the Muslims. But as a common man, though, you still are obligated at times when you see things that are clear in violation. You can't just say, well, I follow my local imam. Well, no, you know that this is violating some principles. You can't say, well, inshallah, I'm just following my local imam. So if there's cases of molestation, if there's cases of money embezzlement, if you know that they're bypassing gas and electricity meters, you can't just say, I just follow my local imam. This is wrong. It's folly and you're responsible for it.
And I'm constantly hearing this argument, actually. So whenever you correct somebody, the argument's always, no, we have to follow the local imam or the local jama'ah. Now, obviously, if your local jama'ah is upon bid'ah and they're constantly making mistake in fiqh and so forth, why would you follow them? So where is this actually coming from, where they're saying you have to follow the local imam, the jama'ah?
What you'll find with many people when they make this argument is they will fall back on a hadith that is in the Sahih of Imam Muslim, which is from Hudayfa al-Yaman, where he said, people used to ask the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam about good things, but I would ask him about bad things for fear that I would fall into them. So I asked him one day, we were in Jahiliyyah, and then this Islam came. Will there be any evil to come after it? And the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, yes. I then asked, will there be any good to come after it? He said, yes, but it will be tainted. And then he goes on in the hadith to say, and what shall we do when we see these differences and these disputes? He said, you should adhere to the imam and the main body of the Muslims. And then he said, but if there isn't that, he said, then you should avoid all sects, even if you have to bite the bark of the trees. Now, some of the Muslims will say that hadith, you see what I'm doing? I'm adhering to my imam and the main body of the Muslims. But if you check that hadith, you can look at the hadith itself and see that it's not talking about your local imam in London, that it's not talking about the local jama'ah on Friday afternoon in your local masjid. It's talking about imam with a capital I, which is the Khalifa of the Muslims.
Subhanallah.
It's talking about the big body where the body of the Muslims are united behind one Khalifa or one Imam that they all agreed upon. And when it says avoid all sects, meaning disputations and fitan and everything else, if you look at the chapter that's under the Sahih of a Muslim, you can see that it's not talking about your local Imam.
Right.
Further to that, if you look at the commentary of Nawawi, Al-Khattabi, Qurtubi, and others, you can see that that's not what is being discussed. Whether you look at the Shafi'is that have commented upon it, the Malikis, the Hanbalis, the Hanafis, all of them are saying this hadith, you can see from the indicators that it's talking about a time in which there won't be khilafah. It's clear that this is what this is discussing. So when people use this hadith in this way, this is the incorrect use of this hadith. It's incorrect. And more importantly, when you say, we've got to follow our local imams. Yes, in the areas that are local, that are peculiar to you. So whatever would be local if you live in Amsterdam, whatever is local to Amsterdam, you follow. But then there's common things that we all share in common. And if there are common things that are being violated, fundamental things that are being violated, those things, if someone tries to say that all religions are equal, or that Jews, Christians, and Muslims worship the same God, or that the God of the Sikh, the God of the Hindu, the God of the Christian, the God of the Jew, the God of the Muslims, all the same God that they're worshiping. They're all worshiping that God right now, and it's the same, and the religions are all equal. This has to be opposed because you know that this is not true. Because you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in Surah Al-Imran, the 3rd Surah 19, in the deen inda Allah al-Islam, that the deen in the sight of Allah is Islam. You know that.
Right.
You know that that's there. So you can't go against that. You can't deny that, right? These are things that have to be shared in common. So the reason why people are saying we have to follow the Imam, many times they lean back on that hadith. And they'll lean sometimes on the hadith, my ummah will not unite upon error. It's like, yeah, but your local community isn't the ummah. It's a small section of the ummah. So you can't use that hadith for that. You still are obligated to look into these matters because you have to find out what you can and cannot follow. The way that local masjids have been set up, they've been set up in most instances to where you go there for your salah, you go home, you come for your Juma, you come home. Okay, then do that.
Right.
But when they start making demands upon you for things outside of that, you have a right to ask questions, to research more into these affairs, and to also say, wait a minute, you're asking me to contribute more to the masjid than what you're giving. You're leading the 5 salah, okay? You're leading the Jum'ah, but that's all you're doing.
That's all.
So why are you asking me to give more as if you're providing more facilities than what you're giving? You have charity status. So the fact that you have charity status means you're not taxed on the land that you're sitting on, and you're not taxed for other things. So what exactly are you asking me to donate towards? Because you're exempt, you have tax exempt status. So what exactly are we donating to?
Right.
If you say we have to pay the imam's wage, okay, well, if the imam does full-time hours, I don't have a problem paying his wage. But sometimes I've been in these masajid. The imam isn't there for all 5 salawat.
No.
Sometimes the iqamah is being made, and you know what it's like. People start rubbernecking. They're looking around. Where is everybody? Then they choose someone, and sometimes they choose someone who's inferior. Qira'ah or tajweed goes forward, and then that imam might be upset. But it's like, how can you weren't here?
Right.
Who's the deputy imam? If you're the imam, and you take money to be the imam, okay, we won't get into the fiqh of the ikhtilaf about it or whatever. Let's just put that to the side. You take money for being in the post of imam. This is what that means.
SubhanAllah.
If you do that, that means you should be doing a 37-hour shift. You should be doing 37 hours. Isn't that the going rate in Europe? 37 hours?
Yeah, up to 40.
So that's it. We expect you between 37 and 40 hours. That means you need to do an 8-hour shift. That means you need to be there for all 5 salawat.
SubhanAllah.
That means you need to be teaching classes.
Allah.
That means to adults and children. And those classes should never go below. So the time that you're there for the salah, we'll add that up. That's about 50 minutes. 50. We'll just make it 60 to round. So that's 1 hour. Alhamdulillah.
Right.
You've only got another 5 or 6 left to equal what will be a legitimate day if you're going to be paid to be imam as a job. So we want to know Quran classes for adults and children. You need to be visiting the prisons to act as a chaplain.
SubhanAllah.
Because there's people in prisons that need help, that don't know anything. There are people who are in hospice care, Muslims that are close to death or about to die. You need to be at their bedside looking after the sick, the infirm, new converts, guys that just got out of prison. All of that is your business as the local imam, caregiver, social worker, advisor, counselor. When you're conducting nikah, have you met the potential married couple? People coming to you regarding talaq. Okay, do you understand the rulings about this? That is a 40-hour, a 37 to 40-hour a week job. If you're going to be paid those rates, then we demand that you do those things. Otherwise, we're not paying for that.
SubhanAllah. And
because we shouldn't have to pay for things when we're not receiving those rates. What are we sending you on Umrah and Hajj for and all these other places? And we're not getting 37 to 40 hours a week. We should be getting that. We should be able to look and see, all right, and since you've been here for the past 5 years, there have been this many hufaz produced. We finished the Quran this many times. These are the books that we finished. And I'm not saying you have to go through Fath al-Bari and Sahih Muslim Sharh Nawawi. I'm not saying it's got to be something expansive like that.
Ayn, right?
Yes, but it's the Fard Ayn things. It's like, okay, so here's the thing. You can say in a congregation, they know every year we're going to do khatam of, you choose whatever book and whatever method, basic book, say in Hanbali fiqh, say Musa al-Qadumi's text. We know that every year we're going through that. As a masjid congregation, every Friday night, people are told, hey, you need to come here. We know that that's going to happen. Every Friday night, every Friday of every month, 4 weeks, 5 of it's a 30-day month, and there's a leap year and there's other things. We know for a fact that we're getting at least 4 Fridays. Okay, we know we're getting that. We know that after Fajr, that there's some qira'ah or there's some other things going on for adults, some other activities, maybe Riyadh al-Salihin. We know. So at least in Ramadan, there's a kitab that we're going. So we know that throughout the year, we know that every year we have it as a regular habit where we're finishing like 3 books, as just a regular habit that we're to the point to where we know, oh, it's coming this year. We're starting back up again. We know, right? That's what you do for a 37 to 40 hour week as Imam.
Subhanallah.
You're there for the salawat unless you're ill. You've trained deputies. So if you can't be there, you have deputies. You've trained mu'adhins. How many masjids do we go to where, alhamdulillah, the imam is qira'ah is solid, everything else, but why is the adhan so poor quality? Who's teaching these mu'adhins? Just anyone gets up and makes there's no mu'adhin ratib.
Yeah.
Just anyone can just get up and just make the adhan.
And people don't meet the conditions of the mu'adhin.
Yeah, so it's just subhanallah. So why is this happening?
Yeah.
These issues are happening. People are getting up. Sometimes when they have the prayer table, whether it's digital, people just get up and just change it. Like, why are you the one that's changing?
Yes, somehow.
Right? All these things are jobs that really the imam, it's his business.
Wow.
To deal with these affairs. Who's the mu'adhin? When is he making the adhan? Who's the mu'adhin ratib? Does he have a deputy? So if he can't be there one day, someone else is there. Right? All these things need to be in place by him. So I can't give a blanket statement where don't follow any of the local imams, but I also can't give a blanket statement that just go ahead and follow your local imam. That's also irresponsible. I would say that to give a balanced approach to say you should follow your imams in the areas that things are agreed upon that you know. But you also have to look at the common things if they do contradiction to them, where you have to go to the opposite direction. And then you also have to ask questions about what's happening. If the masjid is not privately run and it has a charity status, whether they're receiving money from the government and subsidies, so then why am I donating? Why am I donating? Because the masjid, these places, they're not waqf. So it's like, okay, so if they're not waqf, what am I donating to then? Like, what is my money going into? Every week you're asking me, hey, brothers, don't forget, sometimes people send around buckets. Like, okay, what is this money going towards? Oh, it's going towards the electricity and upkeep of the masjid. Okay, so the charity commission doesn't cover that? No, they don't cover. Okay, so gas and electricity, they don't cover. No. All right. So now that we know they don't cover gas and electricity. Okay. Do they cover security for the masjid? Security. We trust in Allah, brother. No. Which is another problem. People have been mentioning to me about what's been going on with the provocation of the race riots and all this other stuff in Western Europe. But here's the thing. Christchurch, a lot of the things in Western Europe and other things would not happen if you had 24 around the clock hirasa, security.
SubhanAllah.
Have to have hirasa. Yeah, we trust in Allah. Yes, so did Uthman radiallahu anhu, but he had the mihrab built The reason why he had a deep mihrab built is so that he could see people coming from behind. Why? Because Omar was assassinated in the Fajr.
Wow. Subhanallah.
Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was poisoned. Uthman was killed in his house. Ali was assassinated coming in the door of the masjid. Right? They had hirasa. They set up hirasa. So these are lessons to get security set up. Tyrant or not, Saddam Hussein al-Takriti, he had masjids built throughout the world called Saddam Hussein al-Takriti Masjid. Culver City, LA, all throughout. Every Saddam Hussein Takriti Masjid I ever went to had hirasa, had security. They had CCTV, they had screens, they had a security room, they had armed security. You either saw that they were armed or you knew, okay, this person is armed. They were always patrolling the exits, everything else. That's what you do in the running and trooping of a masjid. Whether Saddam Hussein was a tyrant or not, it's a different conversation. The point is, those masajid always had security, which is another thing. If there's money that's pouring into the masjids from the congregants, okay, what is the money going towards? These are all the things that I'm mentioning are all part of the implementation process, but they're also all part of the aspect of implementing knowledge and responsibilities of the imam. You've seen, just like I have, the khatib will be on the minbar giving a khutbah and someone might hear something that he doesn't like or whatever and just gets up and just speaks freely.
Right.
Things that he wouldn't dream of doing, say, at his workplace. Things he wouldn't dream of doing, say, in the street. He wouldn't dream of doing those things, but he just gets up and just in the middle of the khutbah where it's haram to speak, you're not supposed to be, but he just gets up and feels his right to just say whatever.
If he knew that there were consequences, he would not dare to do it.
This is the thing. At the very least, there are two people hoofing over to him to escort him out. Okay, listen, you got to go now. You can't do this. I have my constitutional what? Taken out. You have to leave. These are all things. The Christchurch shooting could have been averted. Now, true enough, some security people probably would have died, but he wouldn't have gotten in the masjid into the killings. The race mobs in Western Europe aren't going to be able to do anything because there's security. All of these things, when you have these failings that happen, they always highlight something that we're falling short on.
No.
They highlight these issues. So I can't tell people in good faith, oh yeah, just get behind your imam and that's it. This will be wrong. And I also can't tell people in good faith, yeah, don't listen to anything at all, because neither of those positions are responsible. But you have to understand the background of why many of us came to these countries. And that's why none of the masjids are waqf. That's why we haven't built any hospitals. That's not why we came. We didn't come to give dawah. Dawah, if we're using the word generously, is now an afterthought. There are individual groups doing so. It's an afterthought, but it's not the basis of why many of us came.
Exactly.
So we have to understand that when you have to have all of this in your mind when you're thinking about your local imam, because your local imam might be a businessman or a solicitor or a barrister or whatever else. He's not a local imam in the real sense in many instances of what we'd be thinking about.
No, like he doesn't go around, like, for example, here the imams, they don't even have sufficient knowledge on the fiqh of mu'amalat. Ibadat, they might to a degree be able to explain to you, and they might bring up some relevant topics of good behavior during the khutbah, but I have rarely seen the local imams teaching fiqh, like chapter by chapter.
Yeah. And this is a situation that has to do with implementation.